This week, we're embarking on a new writing unit, and it's only going to last 2 weeks, but I thought that we needed some fun and some magic in our lives right now during this time. So, our writing unit for the next 2 weeks is all about fairy tales or superhero stories or stories with magic that you want to share with people. And what you're going to do this week is you will find planning sheets on our website under writing, and we want you to fill those out when you're thinking about your story. Your story can be based on a fairy tale, but told in a different way. Many writers choose fairy tales that are hundreds of years old, and they adapt them in particular ways. Sometimes they adapt them a lot and change a lot of things about them, and sometimes they don't change many things. One of my favorite adaptations is The Talking Eggs, which is a type of Cinderella story. And that's an example of how an author really changed a whole story to better fit a particular area of the United States in the South that related to Cinderella. Lots of people have retold the Three Little Pigs story. One of my favorites is by Jon Scieszka, where he tells it from the wolf's point of view. So this is another example of how you can retell a story differently. You can make up a fairy tale. You can make up a superhero story. It's totally up to you. My one thing that I want you to think about, though, is sometimes when we bring magic and superheroes and fairy tales to life on a page while writing, we tend to go really big, and it becomes this huge story. And so what I would like you to do this week is I want you to think about how can you tell a small story with this superhero or through this fairy tale that doesn't feel too big and that's going to be a chapter book. That's just kind of like a small moment story. So one of the best ways to get ideas is to read stories. And so I'm going to read a bunch of stories this week and next week for you guys to become familiar again with favorite fairy tale books or magic books. There's not a ton of superhero books, and so I don't have any that I'm going to read to you, but you're welcome to make up your own, and I'm so excited to see that. Today I'm going to read you one of my absolute favorite fairy tales, and it's particularly this retelling of it that is one of my favorites. Paul Zelinsky retold Rapunzel, and it was a Caldecott Honor book. And he does the pictures and the words. And I think one of my favorite things, I just thought Rumpelstiltskin looks so silly and so funny. And this is for sure how I picture him now. So Rumpelstiltskin is a really old fairy tale. It was first written down by the Brothers Grimm. And so Paul Zelinsky kept a lot of the things the same, but he changes the ending a little bit in terms of how Rumpelstiltskin departs from the story, and it's one of my favorite ways that the story ends. So here we go. Rumpelstiltskin. There was once a poor miller who had a beautiful daughter. On his way to town one day, the miller encountered the king. Wanting to impress him, the miller said, "I have a daughter who knows the art of spinning straw into gold." Now, the king had a passion for gold, and such an art intrigued him, so he ordered the miller to send his daughter to the castle straight away. When the girl was brought before him, the king led her to a room that was filled with straw. He gave her spools and a spinning wheel and said, "You may spin all night, but if you have not spun this straw into gold by morning, you will have to die." With that, he locked the door, and the girl was left inside, alone. There sat the poor miller's daughter without the slightest idea how anyone could spin straw into gold. For the life of her, she did not know what to do. She grew more and more frightened, and then she began to weep. Suddenly the door sprang open, and a tiny man stepped in. "Good evening, Mistress Miller," he said. "Why are you sobbing?" "Oh," the girl cried, "I must spin this straw into gold, and I don't know how." "What will you give me if I spin it for you?" the little man asked. "My necklace," answered the girl. The little man took her necklace and sat down at the spinning wheel. He pulled 3 times. Whir, whir, whir. And the spool was wound full of gold thread. He fitted another spool on, and whir, whir, whir. 3 pulls, and that one too was full. And so it went until morning, when all the straw was spun, and all the spools were full of gold. When the king came at sunrise, he was amazed and delighted. But all that gold only made him greedier. So he led the miller's daughter to a larger room filled with straw, and he ordered her to spin this straw too before dawn, if she valued her life. The girl did not know what to do. She began to weep. Once more the door opened, and the little man stepped in. "What will you give me if I spin this straw into gold for you?" he asked. "The ring on my finger," answered the girl, and the little man took her ring. Then he set the spinning wheel whirring, and before the night was over, he had spun all the straw into gleaming gold. Shortly after sunrise, the king returned. Piles of golden spools glowed in the morning light. The king rejoiced at the sight of so much gold, but he still was not satisfied. He led the miller's daughter to a third, even bigger room that was piled high with straw. "Tonight you must spin this straw too," ordered the king, "and if you succeed, you shall become my wife." Because he thought, "I could not find a richer wife in all the world." When the king had left, the little man appeared for the 3rd time. "What will you give me if I spin for you yet once more?" he asked. "I have nothing else," the girl replied. "Then promise that when you become queen, your first child will belong to me." The miller's daughter gasped. How could she promise such a thing? But then she thought, who knows whether that will ever happen? And as she could think of no other way to save herself, she promised, and the little man once again spun all the straw into gold. When the king came in the morning and found everything as he wished, he married the miller's beautiful daughter, and she became queen. A year passed, and the queen brought a handsome baby boy into the world. She gave scarcely a thought to the little man, but one day he appeared suddenly in her room. "Now give me what you promised me," he demanded. The queen pleaded with the little man. He could take all the royal treasure if he would only let her keep her child. But her pleading was in vain. Then she began to weep so piteously that at last the little man was moved. "I will give you 3 days," he said. "If by the end of that time you know my name, you may keep your child." Long into the night the queen sat and thought, and through the next day thinking over all the names she had ever heard. That evening the little man returned, beginning with Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. The queen recited every name she knew, one after another. But to each one the little man replied, "That is not my name." The second day the queen had inquiries made in town, searching for new names, and when the little man came that evening, she posed the strangest and most unusual ones to him. She tried Beastie Ribs, and Lego Ram, and String Bones, but he would only reply, "That is not my name." Now the queen grew truly frightened, and she sent her most faithful servant into the woods to look for the little man. The servant searched through thickets and over clearings, deep into the forest. At last, near the top of a high hill, she spied him. He's right there. He was riding on a cooking spoon around a great fire, crying out, "I brew my beer, I bake my loaves, and soon the queen's own son I'll claim. Oh, lucky me, for no one knows that Rumpelstiltskin is my name." The servant made her way back as fast as she could manage, and at midday reached the castle. You can imagine how glad the queen was when she heard the name. Late that evening, the little man arrived. "Now, Mrs. Queen," he said, "do you know my name? Or do I take your child?" So the queen asked him, "Is your name Will?" "No." "Is your name Phil?" Nope. In that case, is your name Rumpelstiltskin? That devil told you that! That devil told you that! Shrieked Rumpelstiltskin, and in a fury he jumped on his cooking spoon and flew out the window. And he never was heard from again. So, this week, you're going to just plan your story. You may use the planning sheets, or we encourage you to use the planning sheets on our website. You do not need to share them with us. It's for you to start getting your story and your ideas down. Like I said, try to keep it small. Try not to have the biggest adventure ever if you're doing a superhero story, for example. Remember that many fairy tales end with some type of lesson that one of the characters learns. And you may model it off of a fairy tale you already know, or you can come up with your own. Later this week, I'll post more readings of some of my favorite books that relate to this subject, and we can't wait to see what you guys create later. Good luck.